I'm so excited that you're joining me.
I'm excited to be here.
Yes, it's been a long time coming. I mean, you were my first podcast that I was on back in 2000.
Way back when. Oh my goodness. That it feels like it really hasn't been that long ago. Like what, 3 years maybe?
Yes,
Yeah. That feels like forever ago. My goodness.
I know. And I have to give you credit because Tracy, the person who connected us, Tracy,
Yeah. Yeah.
she had seen my graduation speech from law school and it was about quitting and she presented it to you. And then you had me on and I guess I thought we'd talk about quitting a little bit, but you titled the episode Success and the Art of Quitting.
And the art of quitting it. Yeah.
And it kind of just framed it to me and like, oh, this is an entity, this is a thing, this is a category of concepts that people maybe should be talking about. And so that just got me started thinking back in the day, and that has led up to this point where I now have a book coming out on quitting and a podcast on quitting. So I have to give you a big thank you.
Well, you're very welcome. That is so awesome. All I had to do was come up with a title. You had to do the real work.
Just keep
Oh my goodness, that is so cool. That is the fun thing about not chatting very often for several years and getting to see all the cool changes that have happened during that time. That's awesome. Congratulations, by the way.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. And again, like having been on your podcast gave me a lot of courage to be like, oh, I can tell my story and it comes out okay. And my parents really liked it. And
yes. If we got parents' approval, then it's all good.
I figured we were golden at that point. And just so you know, you are my first guinea pig for the video version of this podcast.
Oh, perfect.
Yes.
Does this work for?
It works great.
I didn't plan on video, but if we're always ready to roll. So
I love it. I love it. So we're just going to dive on in because you were, I think, just around the time of your big quit when we first met, correct?
Oh my goodness. I think so. I think that was right around that time. Wow. Yeah. It's been about 3 years ago since we met, and about 3 years ago almost. It'll be 3 years in November, right around Thanksgiving, since I started doing Happen to Your Career full time.
Very cool. Well, can you take us back to what you were doing before and the transition? And then we'll get into some of the maybe fears and logistics.
Yeah, there have been a lot of quits in my, similar to your story. I've had many, many quits along the way, but this particular one, with that transition, what it had looked like leading up to it was, actually, I probably have to tell you about another quit before I tell you about this quit, because that really was what paved the way. So since we're talking about quitting and everything, my wife and I we'd been flying around and being sort of courted by the company that I was working for at the time. And it was actually a really great company, really loved it. And at the time when I took the initial role with the organization, it was very much my dream job. Like, it's super flexible. They're super supportive of our growing family at the time. And all of these other things were great. They gave me a huge budgets to work with. I had a great team. By all intents and purposes, yeah, absolutely my dream job. And, about 3 years into that, I'd realized that although I was really loving what I was doing, I was being pulled in a completely other direction and couldn't really fully identify it at the time. But I was starting to talk to my boss about, hey, what do I want to really do in this organization? And I was very quickly headed down the vice president of HR track, and it sounded really awesome. And we got to fly to Omaha, Nebraska, where they're headquartered. And, we went to NCAA games and all kinds of stuff. Like they gave us gifts and they put us up so that we could look at houses to move down there and all these other things. And then we came back from one of those trips, and my wife and I were talking just over the counter. We had an island in between us in our kitchen, and we're just sort of kind of slumped, semi-tired on the counter, and kind of just looked at each other at the same time. It's like, I don't want to go to Omaha. I'm not sure that I want to be a VP at all. Well, then it's why are we doing this? Because we realized that we live in this fairly tiny town. It's got 20,000 people, so tiny in that regard. But it's Moses Lake, Washington, which is in the middle of nowhere, Washington, and we absolutely love it. We've got family over here. We're right next to the lake. I can get up in the morning at 5 a.m. and go paddle boarding, and it's what we want. And we were going to move away so that I could become a VP, only to come back to like with the plan that we're going to come back because we really want to be here. It's like, well, why would we do that?
Yeah.
So that led actually to me quitting in my head first, this thought process that I had, this trajectory that I was on to move down this VP track, which had been the plan for a while. And that was kind of rough, to be quite honest, because I didn't know how to think about myself differently in that regard. So, but it opened up a whole bunch of other possibilities, and we started having conversations. Well, what do we want to do? Because now it's like, okay, well, we can do anything, right? Like, what do we want to do? And we started talking about what was the type of business that we wanted to run, because I always knew that I wanted to go back to running a business. I'd had businesses before, had helped other people start businesses, and started realizing that I was already giving people career advice. Like, people were buying me coffee left and right and all of these other things to give them career advice. And I love coffee, and it was helping them out. So it was a really great fit. And that started down the track of like, well, I'm already doing these things, and people are offering to pay, and they're sending like really long thank you notes and gift cards. And it's like, well, maybe I should be doing this. So that set out about a 3-year journey up to that point, where I started the business, was working nearly every Saturday, getting up at 4 a.m. and everything like that. And that might sound, I don't know, that might sound really bad to some people, like, oh, how could you do that? But it was doing something that I really wanted to be doing, was enjoying doing, was starting to work, and people appreciated. And it was, I knew that was setting me up for the next phase. So that's what led into, that is all the work, I suppose, that led into being able to quit 3 years later on, when we worked up our revenue to about the same level as what my income was.
Right.
So there's the longer version, I suppose.
I love it. There's so much in there I'd love to ask about. So one of the things you brought up, that's a concept we don't discuss that much, but I think it's super important, is the quitting in your head.
Yeah.
And I realized, let's take a step back. We'll get to the quitting in your head. What was the initial kind of gut feeling? And maybe you've asked your wife about this, or maybe it was just some synergy between the two of you. What nagged at you enough that you stopped and realized, because you sounds like you were going on this track.
Oh yeah.
EP, Omaha.
Make it happen.
Put the brakes on? Was it some type of intuition? What led to you and your wife at the island that night both realizing this is not what we want?
It was multiple little conversations throughout those trips, throughout coming back. Like, we were trying to meet with house builders and things like that. And honestly, every interaction just felt forced. And we were both already on that path. And at one point in time, I really think that was what I wanted. And at one point in time, I really think that was a good path for me. But then I changed, and she changed, and we changed what we wanted too. And I have an alarm going off.
Oh, sure.
Every day at 9:45, it says, text your wife something affirming. So I'm going to actually snooze that for just a little bit. My apologies.
Your text very soon.
Anyhow, so my apologies. I totally interrupted myself, but we were having all of these different conversations, and it really it didn't feel right. It felt forced. Like, we were finding ourselves getting into little tips and stuff like that about like the house that we, turns out, really didn't even want in the first place. And so as soon as we started paying attention to that and stopping to ignore that gut feeling, and realizing that all of this feels forced, it doesn't feel natural, it doesn't feel organic, it doesn't feel like we're moving in the right direction. And as soon as we started paying attention to those feelings, all of a sudden it hit really quick. And that's when we had that realization that night there in the kitchen at the island, and realize that, oh my goodness, geez, now that we've said that out loud and acknowledged that, it's a huge relief. It felt so ridiculously relieving and freeing, even though it hadn't done anything else. Like, there was nothing else that had been done at that point.
Yeah, that's exactly the point, because essentially that's the point where you quit in your head and to your wife, not only it went a little
Yeah.
bit outside of just your head, but that's how I think when your decision is right. Some people are like, should I quit? Should I have not quit? No, if you make that statement out loud or just the quit in your head and you have that flood of relief, I think that's a really validating experience to know, nope, you're on the right path. This quit is the right quit for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And from that point on, you started to do the side hustle, as it's now called, right?
Yes.
That's how we know Tracy, because Tracy has a side hustle success lab. And another thing that you said, yeah, 4 o'clock in the morning might sound terrible to other people, but when you're super jazzed about what you're doing, that's another sign. Like, if I'm excited enough to get up at 4 in the morning to do this thing, this is probably a good sign that this is
We're seeing positive road signs as we're passing down the freeway, right?
exactly. So how did you go from this point? Like, how did you then deal with, let's say, were there any fears that came up in the fact that now, well, I think you mentioned you had not an identity so much, but a career identity. Like, I am
Yeah.
a person who's going to be on the VP track. And then, like you said, for that second, you were like, what do I do? But instead you saw it as an opportunity. Can you go through the thought process somewhere in there?
Yeah. There were lots of fears, some that I didn't even realize were fears, but only realized after after worked through them. But honestly, the as it started moving down that path, it it was clear that I was going to do this in some way, shape, or form. Like that has never really entered my mind that that's not an option. Um, so honestly, it was a little bit different than how some people might think about it, but it was, I didn't know exactly what it was going to look like. Honestly, if you would have asked me when I first had the idea, I thought it was going to be around helping people get raises, or it was going to be around helping people get promoted, because those were a few of the things that I'd done really well over the course of time. And I'm like, I can help other people do this sort of thing. So it absolutely evolved every single step of the way. And the very, very first step actually was just deciding, okay, how are we going to look at this as a business? How are we going to look at this as something serious? Because if this is going to provide income for my wife, myself, and my children here in a few years, well, then it's got to change on a few different levels. Like, it can't just be Starbucks coffee anymore. And so that was part of the transition, to be quite honest, in terms of thinking through, okay, well, how does this need to be different? How do I need to be different? How do I need to behave differently in order to move this down the path? So part of what I started doing was going and talking to other people that had done similar types of businesses, because even though I actually helped people start a number of businesses in the past. I had worked for a franchise company even before that, and like, starting up small businesses was not really a big deal, but I'd never done this type of business where a lot of the marketing is essentially like publication to the world, where you are putting free and incredibly useful content out there to the world so that they can benefit from it, get to build a relationship with you, and then have them want to allow you the option to continue to serve them. And that was just a different type of format. I owned a painting company. I owned a little tiny graphic design company and things like that. And it just worked a little bit differently. So I had to move through it in my head in that way too. But in terms of fears, one of the biggest fears that I didn't fully realize until I got part of the way into it, it was probably about a year and a half in, and I had this realization. And you might relate to this too, just knowing your background, and you've quit a lot of things. I had this realization kind of one day, and almost this panic moment, where I realized that everything that I had done had come from quitting something and sort of moving on to the next, and like seizing that opportunity. And I had this realization that, oh crap, the way to be successful with this is actually to stick with it and push through over the edge, through the things that are really, really hard. And I realized I hadn't had that type of experience, as weird as that sounds, because I was the type of I was the type of kid where I was in college and I was working like 60 or 70 hours a week, where everybody else was like out partying on the weekend. And, you know, I ran a business through college and all of those types of things. So I'd done really hard stuff before, or a lot of people would think it was hard. But I'd never done this, never stuck with something. So that sounded almost absurd in my head, and I couldn't reconcile with it at first. It's like, oh crap, what if I can't do that? Like, what if that's not the thing that I'm good at?
Wow. How did you get over that hump?
Several different ways. And that was the point in time where I also realized that I had to do what we now call, when we work with our students, when we're helping them make really big changes and transitions in one way or another, we now call it building your plan for inevitable success. But what it looked like at the time is like, oh crap, this is going to get really hard. And I've probably almost just seen the beginning of it. So I'm going to have to put multiple things in place for, as it continues to get hard, to allow me to push through those times, those elements. And I've always been the type of person where not necessarily things have been easy for me to go and do, but once I get my mind hooked on it, then it's harder to stop me in some ways. But then I'll kind of eventually get bored with it and quit and move on to the next thing. So I had never thought about it in that way before. So I realized that I'm going to need to make probably some new friends that understand what I'm going through. I'm probably going to need to talk to some different people that I can interact with on a regular basis that have done this before, or understand, what it's like on the other side, and can describe that to me, so that when I'm there and I'm like, oh crap, I thought that these five customers would end up in our program, and that didn't happen, then I'm not, I don't know, wanting to jump off a ledge or something, or whatever else, not wanting to throw in the towel. And that that combination of not just those two pieces, but many other things that I did too, like to the point where still to this day, I don't know if you can see it in the background here, but maybe just off camera, I have little trinkets from that my kids have made me over the years, and they're sitting on my bookshelf. And I started doing that. I didn't have this setup at the time, but I put them right next to me so that every time I'd turn away from the computer, I'd look at those, and it would remind me part of the reason why I was doing this. And it took all of those combination of things, not just one size fits all tactic, but all those things that were meaningful to me that I knew would carry me through, in order to push past some of those fears, because it always gets hard, and there's always a sticking point for everybody in some way.
Yes. I love that you brought it up. The fact that something being hard is not necessarily the deciding factor whether or not you end up quitting it.
Yeah.
People still, where I'm trying to destigmatize quitting, assume that you quit when something gets hard. And most of those memes out there are about like, never, never, never give up, meaning that like, oh, you're thinking of giving up because it's hard. And I think you and I are examples of the fact that we've both done difficult things. Your 60-hour-a-week job during college could not have been easy. Residency and fellowship were not easy.
Yeah.
Those aren't the things that we didn't quit because they were hard. You quit when they're wrong.
Yes.
Feel right for you anymore. And that's a lot of what I want to get across is like, quitting because it's hard sounds more like giving up. What I'm talking about strategic quitting is not that you're giving up. It's that you realize that feeling in your stomach, like, why is this all forced? Why is this not fulfilling? Why would I never want to be getting up at 4 a.m. and doing this? But I'd be fine with getting up and doing something that's much more in line with my passion.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
How did you go from, the idea to 3 years later being able to make the leap? What kind of logistical changes did you have to make? Oh, before we even get into that,
yeah,
you brought up something that a lot of people are talking about these days, and you're so eloquent, you just threw it in there, but I would love to pull it back out. You had to change who you were being to be able to do this. Because a lot of people are like, what do I have to do to be able to pull off something like Scott did? And a lot of people are realizing, no, it's who do I have to be to pull this off?
Yes.
And
yes.
How did you go through that transition? What did you realize? Who's this person you had to transition into?
I'm first of all, I'm so glad that other people are talking about that out there. I've kind of surrounded myself in my own personal little bubble sometimes. So sometimes I don't even know what current events are, which is great in some ways and less great in other ways, but it's kind of the path that I've chosen. And, um, people haven't always been talking about that, but that's one of the realizations that as we've worked with lots of different people, and then I've also made some of these changes for myself, is you really, for each thing that you want to do, especially if we're talking about something that requires behavioral change, often it means that you have to become another person. And knowing that, and I think that's part of what you're getting at here, for me, the type of person that I had to become was, well, for example, I wasn't somebody who got up early in the morning. And to be really honest and frank, I realized early on that I would need to be, I would need to get up earlier because I didn't know where else the time was going to come from. And so I started doing the math in the day, and it's like, oh wait, there's 24 hours in the day. Jeez, I could swear there was more. But started doing that math and realized, okay, well, the only place it's going to come from within my life as it was set up was if I could get up a little bit earlier. And I so first was really gung ho, like made this decision, started doing some work on it, and realized, okay, I'm going to get up at 5 a.m. Yeah, I'm going to get up at 5 a.m. So I got up at 5 a.m. first day and totally just completely crashed 2 days later. Actually managed to get up at 5 a.m. the next day after that, and then fell asleep on the couch. It's like, oh crap, that's not doing anything for me. So the prospect of continuing to just like get up at 5 a.m. Didn't seem to be working, and also didn't sound very appealing. So what I did instead is realize, okay, well, how can I ease into this? So I got up 15 minutes earlier, like every few days, for a really long time, till I backed it all the way up to about 3:55 a.m. every morning. And then for about 4 years or so, I got up at 3:55 a.m. I don't desire to get up at 3:55 a.m. anymore, so I don't choose to. Now moved it back an hour or two, but that's how you have to do it too. The reason I bring that up is because when you're becoming somebody different, very, very rarely is it a cold turkey, overnight, snap the fingers type case. There are stories out there, but usually when you dig further, you realize that something else happened prior to that to enable them to have this just going and all of a sudden be successful with whatever change we're talking about here. And so in that case, it really was, hey, let's do this 15 minutes at a time. Oh, hey, I can do 5:30 a.m. now. Okay. All right. Can I do 5:15? All right. Well, geez, let's go all the way to 3:55. That sounds good. Hit 4 o'clock. Why not 3:55? Yeah. But that was how it worked for everything. I mean, anything that we did in the business very much was structured in that way.
Gotcha. In my own personal experience, the big hurdle I had was that I am not a person who does Facebook Lives or Instagram Lives. Like when I started to promote the pre-sale, people were like, I have to do an Instagram Live. And I was like, you want me to point this camera at myself and just start talking? Like that's
whoa.
And I think I said, like, that's not who I am. You know, I am not a person who does something so seemingly narcissistic as to just, hey, you want to hear me talk for 10 minutes? That was unthinkable at the time. And I was like, no, you have to become a person who realizes that this is part of the process, and that as long as you're giving value and it's coming from the right place, this doesn't make you a raving narcissist. This is just helpful. You know, like you said, you're giving out free content. This is stuff that's in my book that people would pay for, but no, I'm just going to give it out for free to be helpful. And when you come from that place, it helps, realize, or like you said, when you realize it's for your greater purpose, you look over at, okay, this is for my kids or whatever your driving force is. I think it helps you make that transition to the new person that you have to be. Sorry, motorcycle. That you have to be able to pull off that transition ultimately.
Yeah. And I think you said something really important there. And this is actually a flag that we teach our students a lot of the times as well. Anytime you find yourself saying, this is not who I am, that can very much be it, and should be like an alarm bell going off in your head. And not to say that you have to be instantly, when you find yourself saying that, you have to automatically go do the thing. That's not what I'm saying at all. But anytime you find yourself saying that, a lot of times it's fear that's driving that in one way or another. And decisions that are made purely by fear, we find are typically not good long or short-term decisions in a lot of cases, unless it's like, the lion is chasing me down the road, and like that is a good fear decision. But otherwise, when we're talking about something like your career or your business or whatever else, fear is a bad way to make decisions. It is a bad plan. So when you find yourself in that case, I think you did exactly the right thing, because that should trigger the additional question of, is this who I want to become? Is this a part of the type of person I want to become and the changes that I need to make in order to become that person? And if the answer is no, then go about your business and you don't have to, I don't know, run from the line or whatever. But if it is, then I mean, you have to reconcile with that. And it's better to know than not to have that and separate it out from the fear.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, now if we could just move into a little bit of the logistics.
Yes.
To get from A to B.
Oh my goodness, the logistics. Yeah, help me understand what would be most helpful here. What are you most curious about?
You have not a small family. You have 3 children, correct? Okay. Why?
As far as I know, 3 of them. They seem like 5 or 6 children sometimes, but 3 at last count.
Gotcha. So that's a lot to support. I think that is the largest family any of my quitting guests has had. And I'm sure people out there would love to know how you made the financial preparations to be able to transition out of that steady salary.
Yeah. Like a lot of things that we're finding we're talking about today, there was some of the mental and the softer side that went along with it before the actual like dollars and cents too. So I'm married. So anybody who's got a significant other in any way, shape, or form, your significant other, if they're not on board with this type of transition, is going to, it's going to be a big hairy deal. Like this, especially the type of transition that we're talking about right now, it goes so much more effectively if you're on the same page, both partners are on board and everything else. So, I kind of screwed this up at first, to be quite honest. So we were, I talk about like we had that realization at the kitchen counter and everything like that. But then we were totally on the same page there. And then my mind started running wild. And I did a very terrible job for probably the first 6 months after I started figuring out what it was I wanted to do. And it became a case of I would pitch an idea to Alyssa or something like that. And she'd say, well, but how like she's trying to understand. She's coming from a good place. She's trying to understand. And she's like, how's that going to work? And I'm like, dream killer. Oh, dream killer. Don't. And that obviously was not great. So one of the things that I learned through that process, and now would advise anybody going down that road long before you're getting to the dollars and cents, is first you've got to be on the same page with why you're doing it. And I had to do a much better job of bringing Alyssa into that world even before we could talk about the dollars and cents, which was very much the next step. We had to be on the same page in terms of we agreed on an amount that we were going to have in savings. We agreed on an amount that we were going to have in a separate fund, an operations fund for the business. We agreed on, the rough timing in which it would happen. And we set up some other criteria like, hey, I'd actually quit several jobs before, as we kind of alluded to. So she had kind of a little bit this deep-seated fear left over from one time when I did that. And I really didn't do a great job of telling her in advance. And I was frustrated and thought I'd communicated it. But then I came home and was like, hey, I put in my notice today. She's like, what? What? So, through all those mess ups and screw ups and learnings, learned that we needed to do a much better job of setting out these things in advance and agreeing on them. So that was what had to take place long before we could actually earn the dollars and cents. And we decided that about probably 9 months into the start of it, give or take. So 6 months of me not bringing her into the business, 3 months of me going, oh, there's a better way for you to make it easier for you to support me in this. And then that's what led down the road to having those types of conversations. But from there, the actual logistics were, we wanted to have, geez, how much was it? I almost forget now. I think we wanted to have 6 months of, say, I'm looking over there like the answer's out my window or something like that. There's my neighbor's boat sitting in the driveway, and apparently it's on the boat. But I think we wanted to have 6 months of savings, and then we wanted to have some additional funds. And I don't remember exactly what the numbers were, but essentially, like, we wanted to position ourselves so that we didn't have to worry about living expenses if we had multiple months of not coming in. And as it turned out too, we grew the business fairly well, and we actually, the first few months went really well and kept growing, and that was awesome. And then we had 3 months in a row that totally were much lower than what we expected based on our trajectory that we'd had. And we're like, oh crap, well, good thing we had that savings.
Yeah.
So getting into logistics, if we hadn't had that, we would have made some crazy different decisions, or would have been a forced quit potentially.
Right. Okay. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. And it's so perfect, because question number 2 on logistics was going to be, how did you prepare your relationship for it? And you already covered that beautifully. So thank you for sharing the interworkings of your marriage and how it went through that, because that's, like you said, that's huge. That can make or break a quit, I think.
Yeah, totally agreed.
Not a person who's had that specific issue, but I've seen others where, like you said,
oh
if
yeah,
the other person isn't on board, that's an even harder quit. And if they are, man, that can really bolster your courage and your confidence and all those things. So I have to tell you how great it is that Happen to Your Career exists for me, because I am not necessarily a career guidance specialist like you are. I am a quitting specialist. And I always had this little fear, like, people are going to ask me, what's next? Once I quit my job, what's next? And then I think, I just tell them to go to Scott. Like, there's a place for everyone. Pardon?
I said, now what? Well, just go over there.
Yeah.
That's perfect. We'll be thrilled to pieces to help out anybody that is considering quitting, or point them in the right direction. I appreciate that.
Oh, absolutely. Because I listen to your podcast, because so many of the topics you cover are not phrased as quitting, but they definitely involve quitting. And the last episode you had, and I'm going to forget the name of the lady you had on, but it was brilliant. It essentially covered so much of what was in my book in just different terms that I tweeted out immediately. Like, hey, if you're thinking of quitting and you need career advice, this is the place to go. The podcast is, again, called Happen to Your Career. Can you tell people where they can find your podcast and where they can find more about you and your courses?
Yeah, absolutely. And our home base is over at happentoyourcareer.com. So you can get to almost anything from there. But just like you mentioned, we've got the podcast. We run multiple podcasts. In fact, 2 of them are the 2 of the top 5 career change podcasts on iTunes, in fact. So one of those is Happen to Your Career. Another is structured as an audio course called What Fits You. And you can search for either one of those on any podcast player, and they just pop right up. And that's honestly a great way to, especially if you're listening to this and you love podcasts and you love learning in that format, that's a great way to get into our world and understand how we look at careers, because it's much more holistic, and we find we look at things completely backwards from much of the rest of the world. And we can help you with anything from designing career experiments to, once you've decided that you're going to quit, like what happens next, to figuring out what really does create an ideal next step for you. All of those things. We've got 250-ish episodes. We record in advance, so I can't quite remember which one's been released at this point, but about 250 or so episodes out there on iTunes and Stitcher and all the places.
I love it. Thank you so much for joining, and thank you for what you do, because like I said, this ecosystem is full of people who have their little niche. And so I love that your niche is holistic, essentially, like you just said, holistic career transition and creation advice, because it gives me such comfort to be able to forward somebody right over to you, because I know you're going to take great care of them.
Well, I very much appreciate that. And you know what, too? It dawns on me that the place that people are in after they've made the decision to quit, as they have finally worked through the inner quit and the outer quit and all of those pieces along the way, if you want a really great resource, that it's been actually 4 years ago, and we've had, tens of thousands of people through it too at this point. We put together a mini course for what happens when you decide that you're going to move on to the next thing, and what is that next thing, what creates a really great career and a great life for you, whatever that looks like. And we put it in a short mini course format where you can get an email each day for 8 days, and you can actually get that at figureitout.co. And that would be a great resource once you've made that decision, that had that table moment over the island or whatever it is, that wow, this is not the right path, I've got to do something different. But I would send people over there. That would be a great format too.
Excellent. I love it. Thank you for providing that. I really appreciate it. Okay. Well, I can't thank you enough for coming on and for everything you do. And for everyone else out there, until next time, happy quitting.